Hello there, welcome to the Comments in EU collaborative project by Espresso Global and Ukrainian media. I'm Elena Solodovnikova, and it's great pleasure for me to be joined by Askold Lozynskyj, a political activist, one of the leaders of the Ukrainian diaspora in the USA. Hello, Askold.
Hi, how are you?
I'd like to start with Macron's bold statement that European troops have to help Ukraine. Why did the French president suddenly become so decisive? Could this offer make Putin raise the stakes even higher?
Well, I think that he walked it back a little bit later when he said that the troops, for purposes of enabling targeting, for preparing people, for training, for that kind of thing. But he didn't necessarily specify, and in fact, he walked away from that they would actually be doing some fighting, okay? Macron has, to a large degree, gone through a transformation in the last year, which is a positive event. I think that we can be optimistic because of the fact that I believe that the Europeans, despite the fact that they keep insisting that they do not wish to inflame the situation, they recognize that this war in Ukraine is to protect them, okay? That Ukraine is actually protecting all of Europe. It's going to be infinitely more expensive, as President Biden once said, to put boots on the ground, all right, or to have the war in Europe than to arm Ukraine, or even to put boots on the ground in Ukraine as advisors or as trainers. So I think that Europe is coming around, even with, I will step away from Macron and talk about Schultz, Olaf Schultz. I had a conversation in 2021 with Ukraine's former ambassador to Berlin. And this was on the eve of, his name is Mr. Melnik. And this was on the eve of the elections in Germany, and Angela Merkel's party was about to get tossed by Olaf's party, Olaf Scholz's party. And he insisted that Merkel is more of a friend, or Merkel's party, the Christian Democrats, are more of a friend to Ukraine than the socialists would be. Of Olaf Scholz. And I said, well, you know, you'd be very surprised because the Greens are very much in favor of Ukraine, helping Ukraine. This was before the war. And I believe that Olaf Scholz will be much better for Ukraine than Angela Merkel. And he said, why so? And I said, because of old connections and old friendships. Angela Merkel was in Eastern Germany. She was highly placed in the Komsomol there, okay?
Really?
She had a relation.
I don't know, because she knows Russian well, I know.
Her father was a preacher,
yeah.
And he was not in any way persecuted, interestingly enough. And she joined all of the ranks. So she probably, this I don't have any evidence for, that she may have known Putin from Dresden days. Certainly in the beginning she acted very friendly towards Putin, okay? In fact, there were jokes about him scaring her by bringing dogs to meetings with her because she's very much afraid of dogs. But the one thing I can tell you about politics, based on my experience, and I'm 72 years old, is that politics is very dynamic. Old, what would be friends are not necessarily friends anymore. We can talk about the United States, for example. the United States, the better friend for Ukraine long time ago was the Republican Party, a better friend than the Democratic Party. However, this is not the party. The Republican Party today is not the party of Abraham Lincoln. It's not even the party of Ronald Reagan. It is the party of a person who, in essence, is amoral, who's a thug, who's a neophyte in foreign policy. He's not particularly bright. His diploma is in real estate. Okay? So you have to take each individual with a grain of salt. All right? Look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden was in the Senate for 29 years. His boss, previous boss, Barack Obama, I voted for him because he was black. And I thought it was a historical election, and it was important to make America as diverse as possible. But in terms of foreign policy, he was one of the worst presidents America ever had. And I'm a registered Democrat, so please bear in mind that I'm criticizing. And Vice President at that time, Joe Biden, did not agree very often with Barack Obama. But he was the vice president, not the president. Okay, look what Barack Obama did to us in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea and started taking Donbas. He told us not to fight back. That's right.
Yes, he was
and he told us.
So, yes, sorry, could I...
politics...
Yep. Sorry for interrupting. Could I clarify about that first question? Do you think that Ukraine really needs a military on our territory, not I mean soldiers, not weapons? Because we have seen many examples when the foreign troops did not help resolve a conflict because they were rather inactive, as it was in case in Balkans. So do we really need weapons or soldiers?
Ukraine needs ammunition.
Yeah.
It doesn't need European soldiers now, okay? Provided we get all the ammunition that we need, but not the way it has been delivered so far, okay? Ukraine needs, for example, the Taurus missile from Germany. And Ukraine does not need any of our suppliers to tell us where the red line is, okay? If Ukraine wishes to use the Taurus missile to send it to Moscow, Ukraine should be able to do this, okay? Do we need boots on the ground? What we could have used a long time ago was air defense, a shield over Ukraine, a peaceful sky. Okay, now obviously NATO did not deliver, and surprisingly enough, Ukraine, which is probably the weakest in the air and the weakest on sea, has had some of its best achievements in the Black Sea and in the air. So I'm convinced that Ukrainians are capable of protecting all of Europe, provided Europe does its share by supplying not only Europe, but the United States. Because you have to understand that in NATO, Article 5, if Putin attacks any NATO country, the United States is obliged to defend that NATO country. Now, interestingly enough, that Article 5 has only been invoked once. And it's only been invoked in favor of the United States in Afghanistan. No European country so far has invoked this Article 5. So the United States would have to, because people joined them in Afghanistan, they would have granted. I mean, I don't believe, frankly, I don't believe that Donald Trump is going to be elected. Because that, and I don't, even if he is elected, I don't believe that he will try to stop NATO or he will try to disband NATO. Because frankly speaking, Olena, he's too primitive to make foreign policy decisions. You know, there will be right now, because of the election, he has all of the Republicans in his pocket. But all the Republicans that were with him during the first term, the John Boltons of the world, who was National Security Advisor, okay, even his Secretary of State, okay, the last 2 years was completely not. He was not supportive of his foreign policies. Okay, so and as I don't believe that he's going to get elected, and I'll tell you simply why. Why? Because the second largest party in the United States today is independents.
Oh,
And independents are never going to vote.
Definitely.
They're definitely not going to vote. So what you're seeing in these Republican primaries, and take into account the fact that he did, well, Washington, D.C. doesn't matter, but yesterday he lost Vermont. But in many instances, the person who was running against him, Nikki Haley, Ambassador Haley, was achieving in many instances 40% and sometimes even 44%. These were 44% of the Republicans who were against him. They were not necessarily for Nikki Haley, okay? They were against him. Who's going to vote for him? Who's going to vote for him are the uneducated, okay? The people who are Pharisees in terms of religion, the evangelicals, okay? But as soon as they find out that he couldn't care less about life, that his concept of being against abortion, all right, has absolutely nothing to do with his beliefs, okay? And most of America is in favor of abortion. France just recently passed a law that allows for countrywide abortions in the country of France. You know, the position of the Catholic Church is completely untenable, okay? Because life does not begin at conception. You know, there's no scientific basis for this. There's no biblical basis. So if you take all of that into account, I am positive that Trump will not be president. But even if he will be, okay, he will not control foreign policy, okay? Because there are some Republicans who are at least savvy enough politically to recognize that the United States created NATO, okay? The United States created the United Nations. The United Nations is, in essence, the leader of the world because of its economic and military might. And the United States has so many interests throughout the world, including economic. All of these are global companies. All of these American companies are global companies. They're all over the world, okay? This isn't going to work. This isn't going to work with Trump. So isolationism is a malaise. It's rooted for people who have never been outside the United States, okay? People who know the hills of the Adirondacks or the hills of West Virginia, okay? The mountains of West Virginia, but it doesn't work for the United States as a world leader. And they will recognize that Donald Trump he's a fake. I'm also assuming, and I believe, and I hope, that he will be in jail, okay? Because he has 91 charges against him. Some of them are very serious charges. So I think that Ukrainians have to be aware of the fact that we have to make this fight work by getting ammunition immediately from Europe and the United States. But in the long term, the world is beginning to recognize what Ukraine means. It recognizes that if Ukraine joined NATO tomorrow, it would be the second strongest country in NATO. The second strong, can you imagine? All right.
In terms of NATO, I wanted to clarify, does Ukraine really need to become a full-fledged member of NATO now? And why did Sweden, which had remained neutral for 200 years, apply to join the alliance? What do you predict? When will the third war begin? Do you connect this Sweden?
I connect
NATO?
it in the opposite way. I connected in the opposite way. If Ukraine had Ukraine become a member of NATO 2 years ago, Russia would never have invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay, because the only appeasement is a long time policy of the United States and in the world, which doesn't work with Russia. Russia is a bully. Okay, not only Putin, the entire country has a culture of being a bully. It has, look at the territory, 11 time zones, 150 different nationalities in the Russian Federation. Okay, if you give them a red line, all right, which means business, and if Ukraine were a member of NATO and Russia attacked, all of NATO would be obliged to fight on behalf of Ukraine on the territory that was invaded. Okay, so Ukraine needs to be a member of NATO. Ukraine is very much ready for NATO. The argument about, with all due respect, the argument about corruption in Ukraine, these are all specious arguments because Hungary is, if not more corrupt than Ukraine is. Authoritarian regimes, even Slovakia, with this FIFO character, okay? Authoritarian regimes are often very corrupt, okay? Ukraine has made some progress in the area of corruption, but see, what I can tell you as in America, that America is awfully corrupt. American government, let's consider the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of the United States is a position that is based on political favors, okay? If you want to be a judge of the Supreme Court, you better be a good friend of the president or the president's party and the Senate, okay? Those 9 people that are there are not the most qualified people in the legal profession. Federal judges who are all appointed and then ratified by the United States Senate, okay, are all political appointments, okay? They don't even have a code of ethics. They don't have a code of ethics. There have been allegations that Justice Clarence Thomas, has been the beneficiary of improper benefits, okay? But because there is no code of ethics, and they should come up with a code of ethics for themselves, at least pass a code of ethics. But right now, everything is willy-nilly, okay? I'm 72 years old. I own property in the city of New York, okay? We have a Department of Buildings that issues violations. When I was starting out in the 80s, we could buy an inspector with a very small amount of money, okay? Every inspector could have been bought, okay? The police are as corrupt. I have friends in the police who used to be my clients. One guy used to show me his badge and say, this is the iron credit card, which means that he can get anything he wants by just showing this shield that he has. So it's important for Ukraine to be part of NATO. It's very important for Ukraine to be part of the European Union. And the reason for that is because this will stymie Russia. because the only way to stop Russia is A, win the war, have Ukraine become a part of all NATO and European commissions, or decolonize the Russian Empire. Because Russia is not a country. Russia is an empire. 11 time zones, 150 nationalities. You have the Kazansky Tatari that number 7.5 million people, okay? You have the Erzi, you have the Kalmykia, you have the Chechnya, you have the Buryati, you have the Bashkiria. I have an organization in the United States called Americans Against Russian Imperialism. This organization consists of nationalities that are within the Russian Federation. It's the Sakhi, the Kalmykia, well, I mentioned Sakhi, Yakutia, Buryati, Bashkir. I can go up. We have 11 different nationalities that belong to this group, okay? If you eliminate, Belarus is not an independent country, okay? Armenia is not an independent country, okay? Armenia may be waking up a little bit because it now lost Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan, okay? Azerbaijan is an autocratic country, Aliyev, and it's going to be, it's a monarchy, okay? It's going to be more Aliyevs as you go on. And that's precisely the point. You need to create a democratic substance in Central Europe, and Ukraine is the best option for global democracy.
Yes, and by the way, how do you rate the chances of using nuclear weapon during the Russian-Ukrainian war? Because from time to time, Putin threatens to use a nuclear weapon, then objects, and what objects can be attacked? I'm wondering, why did the Russian move nuclear weapons to the territory of Belarus? What does this indicate? Decide to absolve themselves of responsibility or expand their borders?
It's obviously to expand the border, and nuclear weapons is a threat. The person who talks about nuclear weapons all the time is Medvedev. He talks about it because he's a spokesman for Putin. But I doubt very much, okay? Putin is in love with power. He's not in love with dying, okay? If he uses nuclear weapons, then that's going to be the end of everything, okay? Because there are 5 other countries, 4 other countries, well, including Israel, 5 other countries that have nuclear weapons, okay? And that he's never going to use it. It's a bluff, okay? And you have to call his bluff. Don't understand. Remember that Putin is also extremely rich. He's extremely rich in terms of wealth. He's got family. He's got wealth all over the world, okay? And I'm sure he wants to live. He's not ready to die, okay? He doesn't care about his soldiers dying, but he cares about himself dying, okay? So I think that bullies and thugs have to be approached in a similar way, okay? If he's threatening nuclear war, we're telling him in no uncertain terms that that's going to be the last thing that he ever does. There will be no Russia. There may not be any world, but there definitely will be no Russia, because the other countries that have nuclear weapons have infinitely more nuclear weapons than he does, okay? So I don't take that seriously. I frankly, you mentioned Belarus. Belarus is a surprising country. And I'm surprised because of the people are very nice. They're very good, but they're hopeless. I mean, I've been to Belarus. I've been to Minsk. I've been to Mohilev. I've been to Hamil. I know Belarusi here. I don't know. Lukashenko is going for, I don't know, his 6th term next year. Okay, the elections are all farcical. Next year, right? Or when?
He's in power approximately 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
In 1990, he became president. Okay? In any event, he's going for another term next year. Okay? They just had a alleged parliamentary election this year, a couple of weeks ago. He eliminated all of the opposition, only the parties that were loyal to him. Okay? And the revolts in Belarus, even one of the members of the organization that I have in the United States, Americans Against Russian Imperialism, is a Belarusian, a person from Belarus. He's an American citizen, but he never participates in the meetings. You know, it's like pulling teeth with him. It's impossible to get him to, and he's always afraid. You know, you can't be afraid. That's one thing that I admire about the Ukrainian people in Ukraine, that they are so, especially women. I've never met women like this in my life. The women in Ukraine, they aside from the fact, which I think is very important, that many of them, the younger people, speak English, which is very important, and they're very, very courageous. They're eloquent. They're willing to do anything and everything that is necessary to preserve Ukrainian independence. You know. And I don't see this in the Belarusian people. It's a cultural thing. I think that our culture, which had a lot of the Cossack elements, you know, and the fact that we had in independence movements, you know, so I think that we are very fortunate, not fortunate because of our geographical location. Our geographical location stinks because we have the world's most brutal enemy right next door, and perhaps, you know, the fact that we have 30% of all black soil in the world is not a good thing, because sure, we're rich, we could be rich given to our own, you know, possibilities, but everybody wants us, and we're at the crossroads of Europe, between Europe and Asia. But see, God gave us so much. But then to balance it out, he gave us Russia as a neighbor.
Yes, and definitely you had started thinking about an alternative history of Putin long before it became mainstream. How do you explain his obsession with twisting facts, historical facts? Why is he so interested in rewriting history at all by his own will? Do his tales have any impact on international community in reality?
You know, I would say that several decades ago, Putin's rantings, and whether it be Putin or there used to be a guy in the United Nations, Shurkin, or now there's Nebenzev or Lavrov as foreign minister, people would have listened to them. But now nobody listens to it. But I understand Putin, and I'll explain to you why Putin has to write this bizarre version, perverse version of, because Kiev was founded in the 5th century, the city of Kiev. The Kievska state dates back to the 9th century, an independent state, which actually went into Crimea, you know, Tmuturokan even, you know, and it took part of Tmuturokan. Russia wasn't founded until the 12th century, Moskva. There was no Russia. Moscow was founded in the 12th century. There was no independent Muscovy until they broke loose from the Khaganate and the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so that was in the 15th, 16th century. There was no Russia until the 18th, when Peter I, as empire, decided to rename Muscovy into Russia. Putin wants to be Peter I, his second coming in the 21st century. But there is no empire unless there's a history. And the history belongs to Ukraine because it's Kiev. His concept about Novgorod is absurd. The kнязи that came, the original kняzi, okay, came from Scandinavia, then it came from Novgorod, okay? But Novgorod never controlled Kyiv, never. In fact, the Russians took over Novgorod, which was completely independent, by Alexander Nevsky, who somehow became a saint. I don't know, but anything is possible in the Russian Orthodox Church. Okay, so he needs the history. That's why I would tell you that if I were as crazy, but crazy in a smart sense, in a sophisticated sense, because I don't think that he's psychotic. Putin is psychotic, but he's not crazy. Okay, but he wants to be an emperor, and he wants Russia to be an empire. Without Kyiv and the history of Kyiv, there is no empire. Okay, because the empire is very late. It's later than medieval. All right, it's Middle Ages. Okay, and that's why he had to write what he wrote. This is not new. In fact, Catherine II of Russia, who served in the latter half of the 18th century, she hired a whole bunch of historians to write the history of Russia. And she stole Kievan Rus as the history of Russia. Okay? And it's funny because the only relationship between the two is that a Kievan prince came and found the town of Muscovy. Okay? And somehow the town of Muscovy assumes the history of Kievan Rus. That's like saying, on behalf of Ferdinand and Isabella, Christopher Columbus came to the United States. He founded the colonies. He thought it was the West Indies. Okay? And because he came as an emissary of Spain, okay? Spain today, Spanish history, from the very beginning, is the beginning of the history of the United States. In other words, Spain is the United States, okay? And the history of Spain belongs to the United. That's absurd, because American history begins with the first landing with Columbus, and then Plymouth Rock and the Puritans, and American statehood doesn't begin till the 18th century. But Spanish history dates way back, okay? So it's a perversion. It's a perverse view, but he needs it because otherwise there is no empire. He is no czar. He's just a killer. That's all he is. He's a murderer, an autocrat, a strongman, okay? And that's why he needs it. So I understand his psychotic mind, but nobody in the West is buying this anymore. Even American scholars in areas of history at American universities that deal with Russia say that Putin is obviously psychotic, or he's doing this on purpose, but nobody in the world believes today that Kyiv was the cradle of Russia. Okay? Yes. Nobody buys this.
Yes, but back to the modern situation. You know that the last week Biden met with Navalny's widow, and is this how he legitimized her as an official representative of Russian opposition? And will she be able to fulfill this duty, and how will this affect on the rest of Russian opposition, which is already not consolidated?
Well, I'm going to tell you this, that Navalny, by the way, you know, he's Ukrainian on his father's side.
On some roots, some kinds.
Not some, but father's side, very good roots. He spoke Ukrainian, but he was a Russian chauvinist. Yeah. He was what I call a Maloros, because he believed in empire, and he was not happy. He was happy that they were taking over Ukraine. They were trying to take over Ukraine. But in politics, you have to use every opportunity. Okay? I don't believe, unfortunately, that Navalny will be important a year from now. Okay? And his wife, Yulia, since she's in Germany, she's not in Russia, she's not going to be important at all. I mean, nobody's going to pay attention to her. But it's important for the West to pick up on the concept that there is a serious opposition in the Russian Federation. Just as it's important to pick up on the concept that there are nations in the Russian Federation that want to be free. Okay, for example, the Chechens, the Buryats, you know, the Bashkortostan has events going on. They're arresting people in Bashkortostan. Okay, that is important because anything that in any way leads to a possible chaos or problem in the Russian Federation is good. Okay? I don't personally, I'm going to tell you my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know many good Russians. I have met very few, even Solzhenitsyn, who was a hero of sorts, and his mother was Ukrainian. He was a great Russian chauvinist. Brodsky was brazenly a great Russian chauvinist. These are dissidents we're talking about. The Russian culture is such that mama, the mother, teaches her children to die for Mother Russia or for the empire. Okay? The culture is one of death and killing. Read Dostoevsky. Everything is so black. Read the brothers Karamazov. Read all of Russian literature, allegedly great Russian literature. It's empire, empire, empire. I think it's important to use, and this is what I did. I wrote an article about the death of Navalny, okay? To use it as the best way for America to respond to the killing of Alexei Navalny in the Arctic is by supplying arms to Ukraine. Because if you want to punish Putin, that's the best way to punish him. Because how else are you going to punish Putin? I mean, he's got a warrant for his arrest by the International Criminal Court. Putin is not leaving his country, okay? In order for him to get arrested, he has to come to a country that is a signatory of the ICC, okay? And he's not doing that anytime soon. Even Erdogan invited him to Turkey. I don't know when that's going to happen, but they've postponed it already one time, okay? And Erdogan is not a signatory, or Turkey is not a signatory to the Rome Treaty, okay? But he's a pariah. So the only way you can take his wealth, and at some point, there's $300 billion worth of Russian wealth, which is currently held in American banks, okay? And at some point, we're going to use that, all right? Because America has come across, Secretary Yellen has said that we should be able to use this money. It was stopped by the Europeans. But there will come a time, okay, when the $300 billion will be used against Russia to supply arms for Ukraine. And Navalny's death, I personally used to convince the American Congress that that's the best way to punish Putin. I hope Yulia Navalny succeeds, but I don't buy it. If she's afraid to go to Russia because she'll get arrested. From Germany, she's going to do nothing. Okay? She's met with President Biden. She's going to meet with Yulia Zelenskyj. She'll meet with other people. Okay? But Russian society is a different nut to crack because everybody's either too scared or everybody is pro-Russia. You know, Russian Empire. We need this empire because it's a sickness. It's a psychopathic sickness that you get from the Russians. So I hope she's successful in building up an opposition, but I don't see it. Sorry.
Yes. Let's back to Ukraine problems. There are also threats from Hungary that they could annex part of Ukraine. Yes, that is what marginal politicians say. Of course, marginal politicians say that, but under what conditions can this happen? We all know that many Uzhhorod residents have Hungarian passports and speak Hungarian fluent, and how can we avoid repeating the mistakes of Crimea, where there was a similar situation with passports?
What's more likely to happen, rather than Zakarpattia becoming part of Hungary, more likely is that Orban and Hungary will be kicked out of the European Union. That is more likely, and that Orban and Hungary will be kicked out of NATO. They bring nothing to NATO. Okay, nobody needs the Hungarian forces. Okay, Hungary gets money from the European Union. Okay, right now it's under sanctions, so the European Union owns it billions of euros. Okay, but it's a typical case, as a case with any bully. He tries to force feed or force his will upon others until he recognizes that he will be completely ostracized. He will no longer be a bully because he won't have any power. Okay? Orban is a quirk. It's a populist quirk that happened it's the same thing as happened in the United States with Donald Trump. Very similar. Strongmen, right-wing strongmen, they take over in situations where populism reigns. You have similar nut jobs. You have them in France, you have Le Pen's, you have others, you have Slovakia, you have FIFO, but FIFO is becoming more rational 2 months after his election. He's becoming a little more rational. Orban will reach the level of normality, or he will get disposed. He will get thrown out by the Hungarian people once there is a fair election. Right now, he's playing up to the people's nationalistic prime, okay? He's against immigrants. He's against migrants. Donald Trump calls immigrants vermin. His grandfather was an immigrant. Everybody in America is the child of an immigrant, you know? So this is all temporary. Zakarpattia has, there was a delegation that came from Zakarpattia, from Orban, and I was a part of those who met with them in Ivano-Frankivsk. This was, it could have been 2017 or so, or 2018-19. There was an unveiling in the park, in Ivano-Frankivsky Park, of a poet, a big poet. He was very young when he died. I forget his name. A Hungarian. And we used to have, because we were traveling from Lviv, we traveled, and there was a delegation, and the Speaker of Parliament was with the delegation. And we were having, because, you know, every so often we stopped and we ate at restaurants and we had a couple of drinks, you know. So discussion ensued. And I was, unfortunately, I have a tendency to make fun of people that I disagree with. And I was making fun of them, and they were saying, why? And I said, you're probably for Trump, right? And they said, oh, yes, he's a good man. And I said, well, you know why you're saying that? Because he's very similar to Orban, okay? He's a thug. He's a strong man, okay? He's very temporary. He cares only about himself, about his own riches. And if you want to go to other countries and be emissaries for him, you need to behave like normal people, like Democrats, people who want democratic societies. You're not going to convince anybody that nationalistic populism is a good thing today, okay? Because the world is very different today. Do you understand what I'm saying? You go to any country in the world, you will find diversification. You will find that there are so many different nationalities. You know, this was before the election of Zelensky, so I could use Zelensky as an example, but I used another example. I said there was a Ukrainian philosopher, political philosopher, except that he wasn't Ukrainian, he was Polish. His name was Vyacheslav Lipinski. And he became a psychotic Ukrainian, okay? But one thing that I agree with, that he said, everyone that lives on Ukrainian territory is Ukrainian. Because you choose what you wish to be, okay? I disagree with Vasyl Simonenko, who said that you can choose anything in the world except for your native land. I was born in the United States. I lived my entire 72 years. I've been to Ukraine 200 times, but I've lived my entire life in the United States. But when the United States and Ukraine play football, I'm always in favor of Ukraine. And I'm an American citizen, but I am Ukrainian in my heart.
Okay? Yes, and
so people.
Yes, and I wanted to ask you, you have a Ukraine in your heart, and nowadays there is a lot of people talk about Ukrainian refugees who will not return home even after the war is over. We are talking about several million people, and how can we discourage them from staying abroad?
No, I can't do that. Because they've made their choice, and I think that's free. It's free will, and I would never discourage people. And you have to understand also that those people that have come into the United States, the so-called fourth wave, have given us so much. They have refilled our churches. They also, don't forget, these people are mostly educated. The third wave, my parents' wave that came, a lot of them were not educated because they didn't have an opportunity. My father was a lawyer, but he was from 1909. That's why he had an opportunity to study. He studied in Poland and Jagiellońskie Universitet. What I would encourage, and what I am encouraging, is that there are millions of Ukrainians in Russia. I'm encouraging Ukraine, and President Zelensky has already passed a bill on this account about Ukrainians in Russia. Give them an opportunity. You have to vet them because many of them can be agents, but you can have that with people living in Ukraine, okay? You had chief of staff under President Kuchma. I remember I used to laugh with Kuchma about Medvedev, not Medvedev, about Medvedchuk. Medvedchuk was his chief of staff, and he would standing by the door as Kuchma, and I would drink cognac, okay? And he would never say a word. He would just stand there with he has got no lips, you know? And I would laugh at this guy. I would ask Leonid Kuchma, how is it? Because we've had a few drinks. And I said, how would you take somebody like this guy who essentially killed Vasyl Stus, and how would you make him your chief of staff? And he said, well, he's harmless. That's where Kuchma was wrong, okay, because he was very harmless. But the fact of the matter is that people have to be able to choose. There are I know a lot of Ukrainians in Russia who have already moved to Ukraine. Leaders, I'm talking about major leaders who used to. Since Yanukovych took over in Ukraine in 2010, Putin has begun to disassemble, to destroy the Ukrainian communities in Russia. You know how census in Russia has taken, the census taker comes to your house and say, what language do you speak in your house? And they'll say Russian, and they'll mark them as Russian nationality, okay? And they're Ukrainian. There are over 1 million Ukrainians in the city of Moscow itself, just the city of Moscow. But the total Ukrainian population of Russia is allegedly 2 million. That's nonsense. It's closer to 10, 15 million. There's no comparison. You can count them. I went to the region of Omsk, and I went to the villages. They have villages that are named in rayon. They're called Poltavsky rayon, Odeshky rayon, and all of the people there are Ukrainian. They don't speak Ukrainian, but they sing Ukrainian. Okay.
Yes, I know, because
They're
my father is from Belgorod and he talk Ukrainian. All his
Belgorod is a
family.
lot closer, but
Yes,
but
yes, and
okay.
but let's imagine that Ukraine has regained in the borders 1999. What should we do with the residents of the deoccupied Donbas and Crimea territory, who have finally gotten used to live under the Russian boot? Sometimes it seems that many people from here don't care what flag they under. Peace and stability are the main aspiration for them. That is my own thoughts.
This is something
that's a very big problem as for me.
This is something that should have been done almost immediately after the independence proclamation. Regions that were intensively Russified, because during the Great Famine, a lot of Ukrainians perished in the Donbas region, and their places were taken over by Russians that were imported. Okay, but I would not say you got to leave. I would never tell anybody you got to leave. I would create conditions, and so that Donbas becomes attractive for other Ukrainians to move in and to pay the pensions of those people. Okay, even the Russians, but you have to accept Ukrainian citizenship. In order to obtain Ukrainian citizenship, you have to relinquish Russian citizenship. I'm not in favor of dual citizenship. I'm in favor of single citizenship. A lot of my friends here in the diaspora think it's good if they had American or Canadian citizenship and Ukrainian citizenship. Why do you need it? Why is it necessary? They said, because then I could run for office. The president of the Ukrainian World Congress told me this, and that he would like Ukrainian citizenship because then he could run for office. Okay, a former president. I'm not going to, you know who I'm talking about, but you can figure it out. In any event, I'll tell you his first name, and you'll figure it out who it is. Because Ukraine doesn't need you in Ukraine. There are many smarter people than you. Okay, they don't need you to run for president. They need you to go there to work. Okay, but it's not necessary. If you want to live there, give up your Canadian citizenship. Okay, but if you want to have both citizenships, benefit from Canada and Ukraine, you can't run for office without becoming a Ukrainian citizen, and you can't have both. And the beauty is that there's so many smarter Ukrainians in Ukraine than you are, okay, that Ukraine doesn't need you. He couldn't understand how I could tell him that Ukraine doesn't need him. Ukraine doesn't need me. Ukraine doesn't need anybody in the diaspora. They need us to help them, to help Ukraine during those difficult period of time. But Ukraine certainly, look at Zelensky. Okay, who expected Zelensky to be President Zelensky, who at the beginning of the war says, I need ammunition, not a ride. Okay? Who people who know his biography well know that he was a very extremely charismatic individual. Okay? He was a charismatic, he was offered jobs in Moscow, but he stuck. Kvartal 95 was the name of the place that he lived in Kryvyi Rih. And he was offered a job in Moscow. He refused because they said to disband his Kvartal 95. He's a tireless worker. He works all the time. Fortunately, he's only 45 years old or something like that, right? So, which is good. He's young, okay? And the fact, in my opinion, the fact that he's an actor and an attorney, okay? That means
yes,
he's putting on a double.
Yes, back to self-identification factor for Ukrainians who don't need to be Ukrainians in reality? What we
They,
should
they
to
have
do
to
with
learn the Ukrainian,
them?
they have to learn the Ukrainian language. They have to learn. They can learn, they can speak Russian at home, I don't care, but they have to learn the Ukrainian language, which was a precondition in Latvia. When Latvia became independent, they insisted all the Russians learn Latvian in order to become citizens. Okay? In America, you can't take an exam for citizenship unless you're able to speak in English. Okay? You can speak, I love the Spanish people because the Spanish people are always speaking Spanish amongst themselves. But they had to learn some element for business purposes. They had to learn English, and you vet these people, but you give them opportunities. I don't want people to be thrown out. I want people to be brought in, and the people that I want to be brought in are people from Russia, Ukrainians from Russia, who want to live in Ukraine, but they have to be vetted because you can have a ton of Russian agents coming in. Okay. All right, people from other countries. All right, Ukraine is a tremendous land of opportunity. I'm going to give you, for example, I have a good friend in Ukraine who's a Jewish rabbi, Yaakov Bleich. He's from Brooklyn, that's New York. The curious thing is that his grandfather was the rabbi in a little city in Ukraine, Western Ukraine, called Kupishnice. That's where my mother was born. Okay. So we met in the United States, and now he's in Ukraine all the time. All right. And he tells me that when Ukraine became independent, there was maybe 100,000 Jews remaining in Ukraine because a lot of them went to Israel. They came back from Israel. They came back to Ukraine because Ukraine, frankly, Israel is a very dangerous place.
Yeah.
Israel is rich, but it's always going to be a very dangerous place because everybody around Israel hates them. All the Arabic countries, they hate them. That's why it's such a difficult situation. And it's a tiny little sliver. All right. It's nothing land. It doesn't have the opportunity that Ukraine has. First of all, Ukraine has 3 times the population, if not 4 times the population. Okay? So you, perhaps living in Ukraine, you don't understand how attractive a peaceful Ukraine could be. There is nothing more beautiful than Ukrainian scenery, Ukrainian nature, the Ukrainian verba, the Ukrainian kalina. We don't have those in the United States. I had to bring 4 times. I stole kalinas from Ukraine and planted them in America. And some didn't. Okay. So I don't know. I recommend to my American. There was a guy that I met who was from Canada when I was in Kyiv last time. His name was Nick. He was from Vancouver, the location. He has nothing to do with Ukraine, but he joined the forces in Ukraine. Yeah. And he came because he said, I was born in Canada, but here I have something. And he found himself a girl. He's going to get married. In Ukraine, you guys don't take into consideration the fact that one of your greatest attributes is the Ukrainian woman. Okay. Ukrainian women they're beautiful. President Joe Biden, the reason why the first time he went to Ukraine when he was a senator, he was enamored with the women in Ukraine. I brought up 16 attorneys from the United States. We were working on a commercial law project. And we were walking down Khreshchatyk in Kyiv, and they kept their heads were spinning all the time. And I said, you guys got to relax. You're married. What's the matter with you? But it's true. Ukraine is a beautiful country. People are very intelligent. People are very nice. The service industry has improved even. The service industry didn't exist because people weren't giving tips. So they're working for peanuts and nobody was giving tips, But now with a service industry and with tips, with a Western type economy, with the democracy, you have a democracy, all right? If you don't have to worry about a cop arresting you or stopping you for nothing and asking and telling you that he wants a bribe, okay? And you can stop the bribe system. It's very easy. I'll give my own example. I own an apartment in Kyiv, and we remodeled. We changed the bathroom a little bit, moved the kitchen wall, and then I lost the deed to my house, to the apartment. So I had to get another one. So the government came in and they saw that I had moved some wall, one wall. And I said, okay, so I'm going to legalize it. I'll apply for a permit, pay a fine. And the judge said to me, no, you don't have to do any of that. You give us $3,000, us, and we'll and everything will be okay. And my lawyer tells me this, and I said, you tell them that I'm not paying a dime. I don't care if it costs me $100,000 in legal fees, permits, penalties. I'm not giving them a dime. Okay? And I do this all the time on the border. When they look for something, I said, okay, I'll stay here on the border. I have no problem. You have a bed for me? Я положуся, весплюся. And people have to, the only way to uproot this is by having normal pay for people. But some people get a lot of money. Okay, they're just crooks. Okay, but the more you pay bribes, the more you feed corruption. So the people are, unfortunately, they're much less used to it than my friends, because my friends are old. They lived under the Soviet system, but Ukraine did not invent corruption. Okay, corruption has existed since the world began. Okay, and what we need to do is we need to fight that corruption. We need to fight it in the United States. We need to fight it in Ukraine. And Ukraine has tremendous possibilities as long as we win, but we have to win this war.
For the end, I wanted to clarify some point. You said that we need to involve people with Ukrainian roots to Ukraine. Yeah, that is a great, beautiful idea. But, for example, Transnistria asked Russian Federation for help. And many people in Transnistria, they are speaking Ukrainian, and sometimes during the last 30 years, they asked about and thinking about to be part of Ukraine. But what do you think now? Can we add not only people, but some land for Ukraine?
Well, I was in Transnistria 3 or 4 times, once even during the elections when in fact, the day that Yanukovych stole the election in 2004, and I was in Transnistria. Transnistria is a difficult situation because of the following. Originally, the population was roughly 750,000 people, 250,000, 250,000, 250,000, 250,000 Moldovans, 250,000 Russians, 250,000 Ukrainians. Russia its 14th army never left Transnistria. It's still there. There's roughly 1,500 Russian soldiers. Also, what Russia started to do, they started paying pensions to the people in Transnistria, and they concoct matters. For example, they call this General Assembly, which hasn't been called since 2006. Okay, and they said, "Come defend us." And allegedly, they said this. Ukraine couldn't do very much, and the reason why Ukraine and there was a situation where the president of Transnistria went to Kravchuk when Kravchuk was president and said, "Come, we're here. We're a delegation. We would like you to annex us to Ukraine." And Kravchuk didn't do it, and he couldn't do it because we are respectful of the rule of law. There are boundaries, there are territories. When Moldova was created, following the fall of the USSR, Transnistria was just in Moldova, even though it may be originally Ukrainian territory, okay? Because a lot of it is Ukrainian territory. So you have to find a way, and I've spoken with the people there, and I've spent many nights there, and a lot of people that I know, they're Ukrainian patriots. But it's a very difficult situation for Ukraine diplomatically. And frankly speaking, I can't give you an answer today because I don't know what's going to happen. I would have been able to give you an answer because I gave an answer to Klimkin when he was foreign secretary. I had a meeting with him on this subject right after I came back. This was in 2017, I believe it was, when I came back from Pridnestrovia my last time. I was trying to help them financially because I have a fund that helps Ukrainians in poor countries, especially in Eastern Europe. Okay. So they have a Ukrainian school there, so I brought money for the school and so forth and so on. But there's no easy answer. And Klimkin commiserated with me, and I commiserated with him. He said, because for example, the Ukrainian ambassador from Kishinev to Kishinev doesn't travel to Dniester, ani to Bendere, ani to Tiraspol. And the reason why he doesn't is because it would somehow offend the Moldovan people, But the Ukrainian contingency, the Moldovan Republic, the government, the Ukrainian contingency feels like the Ukrainians have forgotten about them because nobody comes from Ukraine except non-governmental people like me or somebody else, But it's a very delicate situation. So obviously, but in all of this, if we beat Russia in this war, all of this will be taken care of. All of this, I'll tell you how, because there won't be a Russian element here. Okay, we'll work something out with the Moldovans to take care of. You have a terrific president in Moldova now, a woman. Okay, all right.
She will be reelected this year.
She was just elected.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we will have to sit down with Moldova, and we will have to reach some type of an agreement about the Ukrainian population there. But I think that we need to respect boundaries, even though there are other territories, and there are territories of Russia that, don't really belong to Russia, that belong to Ukraine. There are territories of Belarus. You have Brest that belongs to us. But I think nonetheless that if we as a democracy and a law-abiding country need to respect international law. So we will have to be satisfied with the boundaries as they were in 1991, or the boundaries as pursuant to the Helsinki Accords of 1975, right? The Ukrainian SSR. Theoretically, we can argue that Crimea doesn't belong to us, belongs to the Tatari. Certainly doesn't belong to Russia because Russia took over Crimea in the 18th century, the late 18th century in 1784 by Tsaritsa Katerina. So, but I think that the world needs to respect the boundaries that were recognized by the international community. So I would say that Dniester will have to go back to Moldova pursuant to an agreement, and we will recoup all of our property. But even Kuban, Kuban in 1918, they declared independence, and they said they want to be part of Ukraine. But if we dismantle the Russian Empire, which absolutely should be divided into Kazansky Tatarstan, Yakutia, Sakha, Tagdali, I would certainly be in favor of that. But now you're talking about international law predicated on war, because Russia, totally unprovoked, it started a war. It's murdered millions of people. War crimes are, I mean, they're just so obvious, the war crimes. I was in Irpin, maybe 5 months after the Irpin situation. And I'm an attorney, so much evidence of war crimes. because you have in Irpin, you have entire residential sectors. There's nothing commercial, nothing military, nothing at all. It was completely destroyed. You have regular cars that could never serve as military vehicles that were riddled with bullets on all sides. Obviously, someone was shooting at the passengers in those cars. So I don't know how the International Court of Justice has not come up with the war crimes issue yet, but they're moving the wheels of justice move very slowly, unfortunately, and unfortunately, justice delayed is very often justice denied. So they would have to move very, very quickly. But the fact of the matter is that because Russia is obvious, it's so obvious, attempted genocide, war crimes, the aggression, there's 4 laws, 4 forms of aggression that are delineated in the Rome Statute, the charter of the International Criminal Court. Russia is guilty of every single one of them, and it's so obvious to me as an attorney, but that's the point, that we need to respect international institutions, and that's why I would respect borders, 1991 borders.